tell me what you value and walk the talk. I will assign you credibility for your personal brand and your values and your beliefs if you follow this formula. So I'll give you a real-life example. One of my core values is serving the community. And I do things like I work a lot with Rotary, but I also work a lot with disabled U.S. veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And I believe that I owe it to them in a very small way to give back to them for their service in this country, for the freedom that I enjoy. That's a huge value of mine. Now, you might say, well, that's really admirable, but where's the proof? Well, the action is that I shut my business down twice a year for a week, and I go to Philadelphia and I work with disabled veterans who've come back with amputations or brain injury, and I teach them my personal branding process. Every one of the veterans that has gone through my program has lifetime access to me. As long as I'm alive doing this and as long as they're in a career, they can tap into my expertise and talents. That's the commitment and the action that builds me credibility for that. So when you think about the values that are so strong and so rich, especially in an organization like Rotary, how are you walking the talk? How are you living those values in your day-to-day life? Because your values are what make you you. We don't all have the same set of values. Maybe your value is honesty and transparency. Then how are you showing that if I ask you a question and look in your eyes, that you're giving me the right answer, that you're giving me an honest answer? If your value is to be approachable, and it's really important to you that people find you approachable, but I go to your office and the door's always closed, or you talk in one-word answers, how is that approachable? How is the way that you're presenting yourself consistent with the integrity and the credibility that you want for that value? This is where personal branding starts to get a little bit tricky, because it is simple, right? Not a very complicated value proposition, but it's not easy. It requires that you get very clear about those values that you want to be known for. So we start in the process of thinking about your current brand, which is the way you are today. Everyone in this room has a personal brand. How about that? You came to this meeting with your personal brand because you have a reputation. You're known for something. People know you and they experience you and they feel a certain way about you. But have you sat and thought about what that reputation might be? Why do people call you? Why do they go to you? Why do they seek you out as opposed to the person sitting next to you? How are you known in your community, in this organization, in the marketplace? What is the reputation that you've earned, perhaps unintentionally, over time? And is it consistent with ultimately how you want to be remembered? And I take my clients and my workshops through an exercise, and we're going to do it kind of very short here. But in order to think about the end, we actually kind of fast forward to the end. And I ask my audiences to think about that day when we're at your funeral. And we're all standing around. Well, you're not standing. We're standing. And your friends and family are off to one side, and they remembered everything about you. They knew you your whole life. How do you want the rest of us to remember you? What are we going to remember about you? Are we going to remember that you were the top litigator in your company? Are we going to remember that you drove the P&L to a specific agenda? Or are we going to remember that you gave to your community? Are we going to remember you for the experience that we had when we were down and out and you really rose to the occasion and supported us? How are we going to feel about you at that moment? By going through that exercise and really thinking about it, you're able to put a stake in the ground in the future and work in that direction. And it's only until you really think about how you want to leave and how you want to be remembered that you can start making changes today to move towards that. From the way you interact with people, to the way you market yourself and promote in your relationships, to the way you present yourself. Are you moving in the direction of that person who will ultimately be remembered the way that you want? Now, we've talked so far about you, right? Pretty important person in the room. But there's also them. And them are your audiences. Because we can't be relevant and compelling to everyone. If you were a company or a product, we couldn't market you to everybody, right? So we take our audience set from everyone and we focus it in on a specific target audience that needs to find you relevant and compelling. For some of you, your target audience might be your customers, or your clients, or your vendors, or your partners, or your fellow Rotarians. But who is that target audience that you need to build relationship with so that they understand your personal brand, that they understand what makes you competitive in the marketplace and what makes you valuable as an experience and a promise of a brand. And then, what do we know about that audience? Because audiences have two sets of needs, and we're all pretty good at this one. This is why we have things like job descriptions and pro formas and RFPs, because we're really good at usually understanding what our audience needs functionally. They need us to be on time and on budget. They need us to be measurable, have track record, have testimonials from clients. We're usually pretty good about the functional needs. I'll give you another real-world example. Starbucks, excellent brand that meets the functional needs of its target audience. If I need a cup of coffee or a caffeine high or a tasty little treat, I can go to Starbucks and my functional need will be met. But what Starbucks does really well is they meet my emotional needs. Because when I walk into a Starbucks, I see the couches and the chairs and the people and the families and the stockings are all hung around the windows. And the barista usually knows my name and she doesn't roll her eyes when I order my fancy drink. And it's consistent and I get a sense of community because that's important to me as a Starbucks consumer. To someone who doesn't care about that, they're not a target customer for Starbucks. You have to know the emotional needs of your target audience. And I'm going to tell you, their emotional needs are things like safety, validation, love. They have real needs because your target audience are real people. And I work with some of the most powerful leaders in education and finance and philanthropy and in sustainable development. And these are powerful, powerful people running billion-dollar companies. And I sit across the table from a real person who looks at me and says, "You really think I can do this?" Yeah, they need to know that we believe in them. So think about what your audience needs when they give you that checklist and they say, "We need you to meet all these deliverables." What can you get past that? How can you understand what is emotionally driving that buying decision to give you that edge? Now, once you've gone through a process, and we're kind of going over the top of it kind of quickly here, but then you start taking this message and this personal brand and this value proposition externally. And networking is a great way to build your personal brand in a community. Because let's face it, we all have relationships. We have personal, we have professional relationships. And I actually teach a whole 2-day course on networking. So I'm covering it real quickly here. But how do you introduce yourself to someone? How do they get to know you? If you're approachable and warm and collaborative, then I would expect you'd come up to me and you'd shake my hand and you'd make really good eye contact. And you'd have an elevator speech that is succinct and powerful and gets my attention but doesn't confuse me. Because that's consistent with being approachable, transparent, and collaborative. So the relationships that you form through Rotary, in the community, how are you carrying that value proposition externally? There's this whole other world that many of us are also playing in called social networking. Anyone here involved in an online forum or doing any kind of social networking? Anybody not want to admit? Social networking is a wonderful place to collaborate, to engage with other thought leaders, to share best practices. And yes, it has a slippery slope. It has a downside, and there are weird people online. But they might look at us and think we're weird. Social networking is a wonderful opportunity to build those relationships. And I can tell you, depending on the business that you're in, it can be a tremendous business tool. I was featured in Forbes.com because of a group comment that I started in one of their LinkedIn forums. Last month, I was quoted in Fortune magazine because they found me on LinkedIn and vetted me through some other social networking. I've collaborated with personal branding experts in Jerusalem who are writing white papers that are so far thinking about my industry because we found each other on Twitter. Social networking is real. We get our news, we get a sense of community through social networking, and we can build relationships that take our business further. And if you're interested more in how to build your brand online, I do talk about that a lot in my book, and I give complete programs on social networking because it is something to embrace. It is not something to run away from. Doing it right, doing it authentically and consistently is key. Because I don't know how many of you Googled me before this meeting, but I know exactly what you'd find on the first 3 pages. I'm not scared when somebody comes up to me in the